Hi, I'm Samantha Murray,
Hi, I'm Courtney Sembler.
and this is CX Signals. Welcome to this week's episode of CX Signals. I've been following Talya Reynolds on LinkedIn for a while now, and if you're not, you need to stop what you're doing and go find her. She's been putting out some of the most thought-provoking content in our space, and one of her posts in particular stopped me cold. It was about what happens to customer education when the learner is no longer a human, when the student is an agent. And that's what we get into in this week's episode. Talya has spent the last several years at Pendo building what I'd call the first real blueprint for agentic customer education, connecting product telemetry, modular content architecture, and in-product delivery into a system that could actually learn and improve over time. And what she discovered in the process completely reframes the conversation our industry keeps having about whether academies are dying. They're not dying. The learner is changing. And that means the people who understand how to design for learning, how to sequence it, govern it, build the feedback loops, are about to become the most important people in the room. That's what we get into today. And I think you're going to be thinking about this for a while. Let's get into it. All right. Talya, thank you so much for joining me on CX Signals. I'm so excited for our conversation. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I am stoked to be here.
Amazing. So for those who may not already be following Talya, I just want to mention, immediately go and follow her on LinkedIn. The content that you have been putting out lately has been so juicy and I've been nerding out so hard. I was just sharing with her before we jumped on the recording. I've just been deep in thought over a lot of the things that you've been sharing. Please go and follow Talya and check out her posts because there's just so much goodness coming from you these days.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that coming from you, especially. Just means the world. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, let's kick it off with a bit of an overview of your background because not everyone knows you. And so I would love for you to, how did you land in customer education? Let's start there because we all have a different version of this, of how we kind of ended up in customer ed. So let's start there.
Man, totally by accident, I stumbled into customer education head over feet. I actually was approached when I graduated college. One of my professors who was really close to was like, hey, we're building out a Hugh Down School of Communication online program. I would love for you to help. And so I actually started building out content and curriculum for Blackboard and helping Arizona State build out this online program. And I got my first taste of instructional design. And then later down the line, I'm in grad school and I got recruited by a software company for a customer success management position. The one and only time I've held that whole position in my career. And it swiftly translated into customer education before I even knew that was a thing because I'm only one person. We're a boot stage startup at that point, ended up getting bought by Workday. And I'm looking at all of these, level 500 companies and thinking about how do I scale myself? So I built out our first help center. I started publishing our thought leadership content. I started creating marketing campaigns for our customers. And I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that something had to change in how we were working. And it just snowballed from there till I landed at HomeBot, where I got to build out full training programs from one-to-many sessions to, mini certifications to a help center and video tutorial libraries. And customer education still didn't have a name yet. And then I stumbled upon Adam Effermesiou and CE Labs. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a thing. I'm not just creating in a vacuum. This is actually a job. And I've just been doing it ever since. And I love it because it's so cross-functional. You're always solving for a real problem. Everyone's a learner. I think I heard someone say that on your podcast, is everyone is a learner. So I'm always excited about how I get to help people move along in their careers, whether that's win time back for themselves, their family, get the promotion. So it's been such a juicy career. It's treated me so well. And I'm so glad that I found my way here.
I love it. Your excitement and your passion for it is palpable, which is super energizing for me because I feel very similarly. And it's so funny that you mentioned Adam because when I stumbled, I have a very similar story. I kind of stumbled in customer ed, and somewhere along my journey, I was pointed to Adam's book. And it was the first time that I had language to
Yeah.
represent what it was that I was doing in my day to day. And I was like, oh my gosh, there are others. And then I found the podcast and I ended up chatting with Adam, and like, we've become friends since. And it's just been like, thank goodness for that moment, because I did admittedly feel pretty isolated in what I was trying to do. I was kind of like, man, like I wish there were other people out there that I could brainstorm with and chat with about this stuff, because I feel very alone in this.
Yeah.
So thank God for C Lab and Adam's book and like so many others since who have put their work out there. I think it's so important for us to put our work out there.
Yeah, and I really appreciate how much he challenged the narrative too, to get us talking about outcomes and what we're accomplishing versus just creating content. I love the evolution to solving real problems, because I'm sure you've experienced this a lot, is that customer education, it's a fight a lot of the time not to be viewed as a cost center. It's a fight a lot of the time to get resources. I used to tell people at Pendo all the time, they would tell me like, oh, well, your content team. And I'm like, we are learning orchestrators. We are we are not a content team. And we're so much more than just content creators, which is a really hard job, by the way, as you know, but so much more than that. And I appreciated how much he elevated the space. And say with, Dave Darrington. So big shout out to both of you guys for helping get us here.
Love it. We have such a good crew in our little industry.
So,
You mentioned grad school. I'm just curious, like, what did you study and how did that relate to some of the roles that you held in your early career or your transition into customer ed?
perfectly and randomly. So, conflict resolution, actually, I was getting my master's in peace studies specifically to go into mediation. I used to do mediation as a trained mediator, and I wanted to start my own clinic. And when I got recruited into software, I quickly found this place that met a lot of my needs, which is, diverse solutions, working with chaos really, and making organization and understanding out of chaos. And mediation is really interesting in how it's all about open-ended questions, helping organically guide people to a place without telling them what to do. So it really helped me not only with how I thought about engaging learners in this space that learners need, but it also taught me how to work cross-functionally really well, how to ask smart questions, when to lead, when to follow, when to create space, and really step back and let things unfold. So I didn't end up finishing my master's, actually. I just been full blown into software, and it's just been carrying me ever since. That was slight just because I loved the role, and also because they raised the cost on the program. And, it turns out there's not a lot of scholarships for peace studies. Go figure.
Okay. All right. Well, so it sounds like you've held several roles. I think I was looking at your LinkedIn yesterday and noticed that customer ed, there's been like a few. So why don't you talk us through a little bit of your journey? You were at Homebot, which you described. You landed at Metadata, at Cube, and then at Pendo. So like, what are some of the things that you noticed in each of these roles that sort of helped you realize that customer education, or the way that we think about customer ed, needs to change? Like, what has been the evolution for you as you've held all of these different roles?
Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of companies can't articulate the problem. And that was the same across pretty much every company that I worked for. Is we know we have a problem, customers aren't adopting. Go create a course, go create an email marketing program, go do a one-to-many training. But we couldn't really put our thumb on what exactly is the business problem that we are solving. We know that it impacts retention. We know that it can cause churn if it's not done well. And we know that we can have a hand in expansion at, crazy rates, but we're really struggling to define the problem in the space. So part of that was really understanding how to work at a leadership level and how to translate the needs of the business directly into how I was going about directing my team to solve these problems. I quickly learned, and this is actually before I arrived at Cube, which made my experience at Cube so much better because they're a finance platform. But at Metadata, I realized the CFO is actually my best friend. The finance team has their hand on the pulse, and they're always looking at cost ratios, ROI, managing the budget. So If I could get close to someone in finance to get a pulse, I could now say, hey, you're struggling to articulate the problem. Here's the problem I'm seeing, and here's the recommended path. So what started my career in honestly a sloppy, kind of creative burst, in my early days at Thinkful before they got acquired, and then, at Metadata, became a lot more prescriptive as I went along. So the better I got at helping the business define the problems and using data to do that, the more I had easier channels into doing work that really moved the needle. And I went from being an order taker to, a personalization consultant. And I think that was a huge differentiator in how I started to navigate and work throughout the business. And then eyes on Pendo. I had eyes on Pendo pretty much the whole time. I role modeled so much of my work off what they were doing. So when I finally landed there, it was a dream come true. I'd always wanted to run customer education at the company that I learned customer education from. And I came in now knowing from all of these experiences that outcomes matter more, jobs, like work to be done matters more, framing it in what is actually movable by education, and not also trying to solve for product all the time. When I first started in customer education, I was trying to fill the gap that product left open for enhancement opportunities or new features, and tried to fill the gap. And I think there's still a role in customer education to do some of that work, but then you end up an order taker versus being prescriptive about how you leverage the tool or the software, not as this, descriptive recipe, but more of something that pull a little here, pull a little there. Here's this complete story that doesn't talk about the product and functionality gaps, but this is how it works and how we make the most of it. Right. And so I stopped trying to fill the gaps and I started just telling a better story and bringing the content along with that larger story I was always trying to tell. And that still guides my work today.
Love it. Okay, so much to get into, but first I'm curious about your Pendo story because you mentioned that, North Star, you wanted to end up there. Were you a Pendo user then in your prior role? And what did that look like in the context of customer ed? Because not all customer education teams hold the keys to something like a Pendo, right? A product adoption focus or product telemetry and like usage or in-app experience work. And so what were you doing before that kind of gave you that vision that you wanted to land at Pendo?
Yeah, well, actually, go figure, it was with Intercom at HomeBot. Intercom, I believe, was one of the first to release in-app guides, orchestrate journeys where I could start piecing together emails and in-app nudges. And when we rolled it out at HomeBot, it was revolutionary. I mean, I remember the CEO stopping the company, pulling us into an all hands and being like, look at what we just did. Look at what Talya did. Look at the product adoption it's driving. And I actually remember product palpably just like cringing because they're supposed to be driving adoption, right? And so Pendo, when I got to use it at Metadata and Cube, it sat with the product team, and the product team didn't seem to know how to squeeze the juice, but I knew how to squeeze the juice, and I really understand how to read the data in a way that I could leverage to be even more targeted and personalized into how we delivered in-app education. And so I'm also was looking at how they leveraged, in-app to prompt for webinars and workshops and enroll people in open betas, things I had never thought about because I was so early in my journey, so focused on functionality rather than the world of learning and how all of the channels that learning really happens. So I got to see that architected and then started to experiment with that at Metadata. I actually built out a whole certification program just on Pendo housed in the resource center. And people thought I was crazy. They were like, what? This is not how you certify people. And I'm just like, watch me. We're going to certify people this way. Such an incredible experience. And we saw huge rises in adoption. But we also saw customer conversations just be far more mature and more users helping users, which I always think is a good hallmark of your education program. If you're having more natural advocates and evangelists, it's a result of good education. I mean, there's no better barometer of success. So I came into Pendo knowing that it was a tool for products. Actually, I wrote about that one day about how, I know that Pendo, you were for the product manager, but really I pretend you're for me. And actually, when I got into Pendo, I found out, guess who majority of our power users are? customer education. Overwhelmingly, we are the largest share of users, and we have so many different titles, but that is the core of it. That was the theme of who our biggest users were. And so I was lucky to step into Pendo versus other, in other orgs. I had to kind of like show them what was possible with Pendo and be the innovator and lead the way. When I got to Pendo, my team was responsible for what we call Pendo on Pendo, which means our own application and usage of the product. So that was totally within my hands, which was what was so exciting, is now I get to orchestrate a whole new experience, and I get to do it in a way I've been wanting to test for a while, which is taking that whole learner experience and thinking about how do you engage, how do you intervene, and how do you contextualize the work that you did all in one system. So if I can get you to complete a workflow, that's great. But can I then help you understand why that workflow mattered and how you can actually talk about ROI yourself and go to your boss and say why it matters? This is what evolved in my strategy so much once I got to do Pendo on Pendo at Pendo.
So it's so awesome because, well, first of all, like the meta-ness, that's not a word, but I'm going to make it up. The meta-ness of what you experienced at Pendo, I've experienced myself in 2 roles, Docebo first and now landing at Gainsight. And it's just such an exciting thing to be able to drink your own champagne, be an advocate for your own product, kind of push the boundaries of what's possible with your product team and be that interface for what's possible for the external customers. It is literally the best place to be. So I love that you were also excited about that. The shift. So it sounds like there was this shift, right? And I think this is where people often get this wrong, is customer education folks will assume that anything that we ship in-app, the reason why I think it sits with product teams today is that, to your point earlier, it's like it's an overlay on top of product UX, right? It's so if the UX doesn't do what it needs to do to guide the user to take the action we need them to take, then we're going to overlay on top and we're going to create these guides, we're going to create these in-app experiences. And that's why it should sit within possibly product, or maybe there's a hand with education teams. But what they're missing is like the jobs to be done and the mental models that are required to make the shift from clicking around and taking actions to now I know how to effectively use this thing to not only do my job, but prove to my business that I'm driving actual outcomes for our customers and for the business's growth. So what did that look like for you in practice? It sounds like you made that shift actively in your role at Pendo. What did you discover along the way of like actively making this transition?
Ooh, that there was a lot of debate. I mean, because the thing is there's so many ways to do one workflow. There is multiple paths to success. So you still have to do a bit of work to figure out what is my, I call it keystone. There's this whole idea in ecology that you have these species that if you remove the species, the whole system collapses over time because they're so, so, so critical. So I brought that into my work in a very deep, palpable way, which is like, who's my keystone persona? What's my keystone process? What's the process that is the most important? If people find their own way to it, like solving a mathematical equation, you still got the right answer. That's great. But I still need to figure out, how do I give you the best, most simple path to achieving this outcome? Luckily for me, we had, before I had joined, Pendo had created product-led onboarding, which means we were actually using embedded guides through the onboarding experience to bring in and pull in user information, such as what do you want to accomplish with Pendo? So we pulled the data on that and we're like, okay, people are here to increase product adoption, increase support deflection, to turn trials into, to convert trials. So many different reasons that individual users are coming to Pendo and what they hope to accomplish out of it. So we took a look at, the data and what overarchingly are people really here to do. And, no shocker, it was drive product adoption. That's the platform that Pendo has really run on for a lot of the work that it's done. And this next layer was understanding the segment that was most important. So again, who's my keystone persona? And overwhelmingly, it was the admin. The admin is just so overlooked, I feel like, at a lot of companies, but they are who you're building the back of your whole business case for your product on, they have to know everything. They have to know the technical components, the business case, the use cases. They have to be able to enable other people. So now that we determined driving product adoption is actually very big, it's very vague in truth. Driving adoption for what purpose? To prove that this beta feature is worth investing in, prove that you can convert trial into paid users, make sure that this feature that you've just spent all this money in is actually going to pay off. So we had to do a little bit of shooting in the dark, but overwhelmingly there's these core business outcomes that every company cares about, and agnostic, right? You care about reducing cost, you care about reducing risk, and you care about increasing revenue. So let's anchor these key business outcomes to the stories we tell with driving product adoption. And so we created a whole new experience. We actually did a content hackathon, and we locked ourselves in a room for a few days, and we took a look at the data. We took a look at our persona. We broke down all of the possible pathways, what the most simple, successful path looks like. I think about BJ Fogg's a lot and his MAP method, which is like motivation, action, prompt, right? So it's like, what people care most about is, outside of motivation, is doing the least amount of work to get the goal. So how do we make this as simple as possible? And that's how we ultimately produced this campaign. We decided, let's try going for low, no usage users. Let's go for people who've been with us for a while that just aren't seeing value in the product, and see if we can re-engage them. And so we created a whole content strategy armed at driving real engagement with these users. This looks like a series of different Orchestrate campaigns where we're experimenting with messaging that we would link and do embedded guides to trigger. Some of those guides we would try meeting them with. Other times we would do what I call more intervention style, which is they've done the action, but they made an error, and now we're going to help them course correct, which I find can deepen learning. And we're running all of these experiences at a rapid scale, and we're pulling in all of this really rich course content that our team had already created, which made it so much easier. We had all of this feature-based content. It just hadn't been framed in the story. So we reframed it in the story. And then we actually started working on creating courses that were totally framed in the story. How to do new user onboarding with Pendo, how to reduce churn with Pendo. How do we actually give you the story and the tactics, the strategy all in one? But of course, we found, and I think that's part of our conversation, right, is that people don't want to learn outside of the product anymore. They really want to learn inside. So the challenge to the team was, how do we create a scaffolded learning experience in the product itself, and then find a way to certify them based on the outcomes they achieved versus assessment that they passed?
How does that relate then to Pendo Academy and any of the content that might have been distributed through the more sort of traditional means or channels that we had access to in customer ed? So when I think about, like right content, right place, right time, obviously we have all of these channels at our disposal.
Mm-hmm.
Most teams, I think, end up not only getting stuck in which channel to use when to activate on a particular goal that you have, but also in that often, unfortunately, these teams are disconnected internally too, right? They're operating in silos. So you've got your community team sitting in one place, you've got your customer ed academy team sitting in one place, your in-app and email lifecycle sitting in a different place. And often none of them are talking to one another, and that creates a really disjointed experience. So how did you think about pulling together sort of the underlying infrastructure of the content in order to orchestrate experiences across all of these different touch points?
Yeah, I went on the road. So I took the vision on the road, and I went and I got really intimate to, what are the problems of this team? Where are they focused on? Can we carve out some swim lanes? And I painted a vision of what was possible once I understood what these teams are reckoning with. For marketing, who's overseeing our community, the pressing need to really support and more lead and prospect conversion, more PLG type motions. Same with our lifecycle marketing. They were focused on growth. Almost no one in the business was actually focused on the core of our products, and ensuring adoption was really taking root in this more expansive way. So I took it on the road and was really clear about, what we thought was possible, and how does this contribute to the bottom line of their business? How is it going to make their PLG motions faster, stronger? How I talked to customer marketing, and like, I painted a vision. What would it look like if I could give you really clear segments on who's a do not touch, do not talk to, they are not ready, and who is ripe for expansion? And positioning it that way got me a lot of buy-in. It also garnered a lot of trust in that I'm here to play on this team. I'm not here to, swim in anyone else's territory. But by allowing me and giving me space to do this work, you're going to see some dividends. And how can we work on this together? So really engaging them as advisors, as stakeholders. I've dabbled in customer marketing. It was a natural part of my job. I've dabbled in product marketing, technical support. I've dabbled in it all, but it doesn't mean that I'm an expert like people who spent their whole career just doing it. So engaging them and making them advisors in the work went wonders, and forming, this customer journey committee to inform how work to get done. So we actually did a meeting and we brought in these key stakeholders. We walked through the data, our findings, our opportunity ahead in our plan, and just asked people to poke holes. And then we would come back and we would report out on the data and the metrics and what we thought next steps looked like as a result. And you could say that was a lot of work. I think it's bringing the org along with you and creating real, camaraderie. Value at Pendo is team is Pendo. And so they got to inform on what they really cared about. But most often they're really focused, and I find this across businesses, on net new features, not existing features. And so that gave us a really clear swim lane. We can focus on this with really limited interference. We're not going to be burning any bridges, and we can really own this category. And then we can fold in net new features based on what these other teams are doing. Because to your point, it was, disparate. Everyone is operating in their own systems. And so I'd say data, conversations, really good, socializing of our mission and our goal, and focusing on what we knew we could control that was truly problems that we could solve. And a lot of that came from churn data.
Right. So, man, there's so many things I want to pick on there, but I think that's a really good overview for people who might be struggling with figuring out how to align folks internally to a single mission. And it sounds like there's so much good advice in there for folks who are really trying to do that right now. The other side of the problem that I think we need to acknowledge here is the data infrastructure that is required in order to actually be able to distribute content across multiple channels, right? Content orchestration at scale, if that's what we want to get into, which I'd love to. What does that look like in the actual infrastructure piece of it? And how did you do that at Pendo?
Yeah. Data, I mean, gosh, if you're, for the listeners, raise your hand if you feel a problem with data. It's the hardest problem to solve. It's so tough. You got different health scores. Data science has a health score. Customer success has a health score. You have definitions of what makes product adoption successful. How does that change based on feature? How does it change based on user, based on persona? Man, I mean, it is a beast to tackle. And I think, thank goodness for AI, because you can use historical analysis and predictive behavior analysis, which is arguably one of the things that AI is the strongest at doing at this point in time, to take a look at all of these data. Then the question is access. Can I get the access rights? And again, you have to go interview these stakeholders. I did. I talked to our VP of data science all of the time. What does this mean to you? What does health mean to you? What does adoption mean to you? And then I go to the product leadership. What does this mean to you? And it's comparing definitions, creating kind of an agreed upon system of definitions for what we mean by health, what we mean by good adoption, what it means for each persona, who do they care about most, what was the most predictive data to show adoption over time. And so, we're working with Salesforce, we're working with Zendesk. So we have ticket data, account data, product data, plus we are pulling in all of this unstructured call data into Supabase, and my team created a layer to pull out trends. So all of these different data sets that we actually had to meaningfully combine. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm an expert. The truth is I relied a lot on AI to look at that data for me and help tell a story with me. How is it that I can combine these meaningful data points and layer them over each other to indicate what's really happening to this user? and step away from the account level. But again, it takes a lot of dialogue, willingness to be wrong, having conversation with these key stakeholders, and then bringing back these definitions, which is so, so, so important. Because if I'm showcasing what I'm doing, at a town all hands, and I'm talking about data in a way that our VP of data science doesn't agree with, well, that's a red flag to them. And it's not a boon to me. So I really need to make sure we're aligned, we're working with the same definitions. And I'm able to also challenge old school ways of thinking by saying, hey, we don't just have product telemetry anymore, and we don't just have sentiment data. It made it possible for us to take all this unstructured ticket data, community data, Slack trends, Google Docs, to take all of this and layer it over each other to tell a complete story. Something that would have taken our data team 6 months, my team did in a week. I mean, a week. And it blew my mind. And I can't pretend that I'm the system expert. It truly was my team. My part to play was bringing together those stakeholders, carving out those definitions, and understanding why we needed certain data. Like, I was insistent, we need support ticket data. I need to know what people are regularly asking about. That's the only thing that's going to help me understand maturity truly, is how sophisticated of questions are they asking,
Yes, yes. Okay, so you're pulling in all of this data, you're correlating all of this data, making sense of the data, but then there's the other side of the equation, which is like, now we need to figure out what content we already have that solves the problem, right, for that vision that we now have on the user or the customer account. And that means that content also needs to be structured differently than it has been traditionally. Right? How did you make that transition, or is that something that was still a bit of a work in progress?
Absolutely still a work in progress. I can talk through how we were doing it. To my knowledge, the team is still actually moving forward with my roadmap. So yay me. Must have been pretty dang good. But what we were doing actually was pulling all of our academy content off the LMS and actually moving it into Parta. For those who don't know, Parta is an authoring tool. I won't spend too much time talking about it, only to say that the most sophisticated insight we can get on content consumption in the market, to my knowledge. It also is super modular. So I'm thinking about, how do we break this down into really bite-sized chunks? How do we really take this idea of scaffolding to the nth degree? I want a foundational layer. I want to build on that layer, and I want to do it. I was really inspired, and I think we've all had to be inspired, whether we'd call it inspiration or not, by TikTok and Instagram and Reels, where now the rate of consumption has changed and what we are willing to tolerate for length, and quick to the point, especially when I can ask ChatGPT a quick question and get a quick answer. So now we're having to contextualize this all into these bite-sized chunks, but we can't miss the beat, right? We still have to layer it into a larger story. We need to think about the technical components along with the strategical components and build a complete picture. So breaking it down into micro learning pieces and using really clear naming conventions and descriptions, because that's going to help your AI understand and access your, what I call like a repository of content, your content repository, having clear names and descriptions, not just for what the content is, but who it's for and what it's meant to accomplish. That helps too when you're creating content, because you want to have the learner in mind. You want to know the learning objective, and you want to know by the end of this, they've accomplished what, right? So adding that into your actual description is going to help AI index your repository to find this stuff. And then by having it modular, like Parta allowed us to do, we were able to then create content more fluidly. And so what we were looking at was more formulaic approach. So modulars that are specifically tactical, that are highly product functionality, is its own category, which is important for driving updates and knowing, okay, we've been talking about, how to drive adoption with just guides alone. You need to know the ins and outs of building a guide. All that content is still relevant, but now needs to be contextualized. So what the plan is, like, let's split it down the middle. Let's have all of our tactical content that we still need, that's pure product functionality, just focus on product functionality. Only that. We're not weaving in stories. We're not telling any stories in that content at all. We're just keeping it to functionality. That way, when I have to update it later, I know exactly what I need to change. Your more evergreen content is your strategy. It is your thought leadership. Those don't change too much, though, mark my words, because AI is changing everything. Those stories don't change. So then that thought leadership layer, that you can now marry your best practices with your product functionality to show a complete picture. This modular kind of bite-sized snack approach allows me to not only create a full course that I can now house in app. You can embed that content into the resource center. A lot of tools have resource centers, not just Pendo. So you can embed it now into your product. Now I don't have to go anywhere. I can also embed it into guides. So I can also embed it on empty state pages, right? So now I can take this bite-sized content, embed it in all of these different places, and then manage it from a single source of truth, which is that repository. And now I have these content data insights that I can marry with user behavior, product behavior. And so over time, my theory is, right, is that you can then have an agent that's informing what content gets created, what content gets leveraged based on what's working and what isn't working. And now eventually you can then have your agent make recommendations to what content is missing or needs to be changed, but you're only managing it in one place. And now this content orchestration allows you to be omni-channel without that really heavy, for lack of a better word, like overhead, the cost of having all that content to maintain in all these different places. I maintain it from one, I push it out to all these channels, even in community, and it's relevant, it's contextually relevant to the conversation or to the moment in time that person needs to be learning.
Yep. And I don't think we're that far off from this vision of having an orchestration agent that is able to marry the data and context on the user and what they're trying to accomplish. We're tracking, health scores. We're tracking their product usage and telemetry data. We're tracking their support tickets. We're tracking all of this stuff. And then being able to take that modularized content that you were speaking about and like deciding on which channel and at what moment in time it makes the most sense to present the content to the user. I don't think we're actually that far off, because finally we're at a place with the advancements in tech and AI that like, this is all actually possible. 2 years ago, when I was having these conversations with people, I still remember like back in the day, I can't remember exactly what year it was when we were building Shopify Compass when I was at Shopify, but we created our own in-house LMS. And at the time, I remember having this conversation with one of the product managers and sharing kind of this vision. And they looked at me like I had three heads. It was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? This is crazy. Yeah. And I'm like, well, we have all of the data and we've been tracking the users. We know what they're doing. And we also have all of this content in Academy. And so what do you mean we can't just take it and ship it to them at the right moment? Like, we should have algorithms that decide when this happens. And oh my God, no, like this is, this is going to take us years to build. Here we are. We made it. We made it to the place that I was hoping we were going to get to. But I think the biggest hurdle that folks are going to face is the governance that we were speaking about in terms of not only the data architecture, but the content architecture, and making sure that you have your systems in place to be able to meet the demands of the moment that we're in.
Absolutely. Yeah. It becomes more, we're being asked to think outside of the box because we're operating with less constraints than before. And so I think the biggest problem that I see and that I had was trying to drag AI into this existing structure rather than being willing to, kind of blow up that infrastructure and start from scratch, which means I get to think about what is actually the best way for this learner to ingest this material. It doesn't have to be a video. It doesn't have to be this one-to-many webinar. It doesn't have to be a guide. It might be this coaching experience with an agent. It might actually just be a short video. So stepping back and thinking about, if I could have it all my way and use adult learning theory at my disposal, how do I want to think about these moments of learning and the tools that I have available to rethink what content actually looks like, how it breathes and moves is more than just this, what we see, which is like video content to read, and an assessment, right? It's like now we get to create virtual simulations and we get to be so creative. We get to call upon, the peer coaches, your power users, and have them leading learning, and have them lead learning live in the products. Like what? There's so many cool possibilities that are so, so, so rich. So you have to start with thinking outside of the box of what's possible and trusting it actually is now within the realm of reason. It's totally possible now.
Totally. And what excites me the most about the moment that we're in, there's like a lot, but I think the fact that we're sort of moving away from academy as the singular destination for learning to happen to this multi-channel distribution model. And in addition to that, thinking about how we can pull together community and academy into a singular destination experience, because I don't think that necessarily goes away. And I want to talk a little bit about like headless technology and what that means for the evolution of our field. Because what I'm sort of predicting and what I've been sort of toying with or ideating around is this idea that as the UI goes away and more people start to use things like MCP to do the majority of their work, they're not logging into a platform anymore. They're using something like an MCP. Our in-app experiences or our opportunity to influence in-app might go away. And so does that bring back the need for us to educate through something like some sort of digital combined experience, Academy Plus community? And then more importantly, and I think you sort of touched on this a little bit, is like in that world where I'm using an MCP to do the majority of my work, I'm no longer needing to write workflows, automations, if and statements, and trying to figure out all of these different scenarios in which my users might need information. But instead, I'm using a chatbot like experience. That doesn't mean that my understanding of designing workflows or orchestrating experiences goes away. In fact, it becomes even more critical that I understand how to do that. And so the need for, certifications around agent orchestration and designing logical workflows increases. And that means that the need for an academy doesn't go away. Because I've heard this debate so much. It's like, oh, academy is useless. Oh, we don't need that anymore. And it's like, guys, like we're entering this whole different era. Things are changing so quickly. So I'm super curious to get your take on all of that and where we're headed.
I love what you're saying, and just kudos to you for being so ahead of the curve, to be honest, from your conversation with your leadership 3 years back to how you're thinking about it now. I mean, it's no surprise Anthropic, OpenAI are, guess what, investing in curriculum to teach people how to do this, because something that has been keeping me up at night is you're still gonna need, and this hits home to your point, you're still gonna need people who understand how agent orchestrate works to troubleshoot the agent, right? So yeah, they might not be, humans might not be your core learner from a product functionality standpoint. Well, that's good news. That's good news. We never wanted the product to be that hard. That's part of why people have railed against customer education, because it should be solved within the product. Well, guess what? Agentic, headless, it allows us to do that now. Or soon, I would say soon. I think that there's a lot of problems we still need to solve for. But yeah, I mean, I think what's keeping me up at night is, in how do you then educate the user on how to think through systems, how to build a new mental model for how agents are working, how you apply and advocate and correct agents. I read this really fascinating LinkedIn post the other day about someone who works in C-suite, and everything her CEO did was questioned through an AI lens. Well, what did AI say? Well, what did AI say? Well, what did AI say? And so now too, we're going to need these different soft skills are emerging, right? Which is, how do you, talk through when the AI is wrong, or what could make it better. But you can only do that through a rich understanding of what is even happening, what is making that infrastructure tick, how it is learning. And I think that's where there's this huge opportunity for folks like us because we can create the environment of learning, which means we can understand what that environment looks like, right? Where I think about it's like curating the corpus, right? Like we're curating the brain of what the agent has access to, what's in scope, what's out of scope. We are defining the guardrails of what it can recommend, what it can't, when it should escalate, what it should never absolutely do. I'm like, never use M dashes. I'm ruined. They're ruined for me now. And we get to build the feedback loops, right? Which is, how do you know the agent is reasoning well or confidently wrong? And, what's the mechanism for correcting it? So I think that like it's going to create a larger need for humans who understand the domain well enough to audit the outputs that they're generating, or that they didn't even generate at all, that an agent did. And now we need to audit and make sure and keep that human governance layer, I think, becomes more important. It doesn't matter how fast AI evolves without strong, good judgment from humans who know and understand how things are working. So I think you're on the money with that. I don't think that academies go away. I think that they evolve and they change. Hopefully they get prescriptive to user maturity. And I think that they've just kind of been more static, but hopefully they evolve to take in those inputs of what the agent's been doing and what the user's been doing, and then prescribe a rich training program that is calling on all of these learning best practices of application, of simulation, of trial and error, where we can design experiments for agents and humans to walk into a problem and see how they would back themselves out of it or work their way through it. And so I think it just, again, it opens up the opportunity of what good learning has always wanted to look like.
Yes.
But our constraints never really allowed us to go there without a lot of investment.
Hallelujah. Man, like, couldn't have said it better myself. And I think there's been a lot of probably unnecessary fear, in my opinion, amongst customer education practitioners and leaders, thinking, like, oh man, things are changing so quickly. What does this mean for my role? And, everyone's saying academy goes away and all of this like stuff. And it's like, no, what an incredible opportunity for you to step up with your knowledge and expertise on instructional design and instructional best practices and how to teach people fundamentally mental models that help them do their job better. And also then agents in the mix. Like, we are the best positioned to solve the problem that we're about to enter into in this new AI era. We are the best positioned to do that. So I think it's a really exciting moment in time. And I love that you're sharing in that excitement. Looking at the time, I know we have to wrap it up, but I guess I want to end with one more question. If you had to say one thing to a digital CX leader who's listening to this, who's feeling a lot of pressure right now around, AI adoption, but isn't really sure where to begin, what's the one thing that's the most important for them to get right first and foremost?
Get the team to buy in. I think we don't do that enough. We're not speaking to the very real and, in a lot of cases, true fear of jobs changing. And I want to be specific about saying changing as a result of agentic work. And I think we will see some jobs go away entirely, but we will see a lot of them evolve. Right? Which means you want your team bought in. The way that I did this was I hosted a mini hackathon for skills, for Claude skills. And I said, this is the future of learning. This is the future of instructional design. That's just like my stake in the ground. I'm like, everyone needs to know how to write a good skill. And so I put it to the task because my team, most of them were super resistant to AI taking their jobs. I felt that same way until I realized that, AI is quite dumb without a lot of prompting, a lot of support, a lot of hand-on holding. Who's the best people to train? Well, we are. And so I had my team create skills and showcase them to each other. And it was aha moments across the board at how much of their life could be made easier. So I would say, if you're really struggling on your AI initiative, is don't try and solve it by yourself. Turn it over to your team, allow them, share what their concerns are, and then inspire them with the truth of the matter, which is like, the field's evolving, let's evolve with it, and have them go create something and share their learnings and make that a regular part of your culture. You're going to see AI adoption much higher. You're going to tell a better story to your leadership. And more importantly, you're going to take advantage of that incredible SME work and watch that get infused into the product. Watch that. Part of, me leaving Pendo is, guess where my team went? Product. Because we were creating the future of the product. They were actually productizing the work that we were doing. I mean, that's how big it was. So that's my advice to those who are listening is start with your team, get creative with them, and give them an opportunity to try it on, truly try it on, and share what they're learning. I think that's going to be the quickest way to move past the fear and into the excitement territory. And now we're thinking creatively because we're not constrained by fear.
That's right. And not blocked by the fear will actually block the nervous system
Exactly.
from being able to access that higher level of creativity that we need right now to get excited about what's unfolding. Oh my gosh, such good advice. Talya, thank you so much for joining me. I have loved this conversation. So, I share your passion so tremendously about what lies ahead for our industry. Where can people find you other than LinkedIn? I know you're on LinkedIn. Everyone, again, just another plug, go follow her. Incredible content. Where else can people find you if they want to chat?
LinkedIn. I'm thinking about a Substack, but right now you can just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm chatting with everybody right now who's interested in having this conversation. I don't have all the answers. I have a lot of theories and a lot of ideas, and I'd love to talk about with people who are innovating and wanting to try it on. So seriously, if that's you, let's talk, no pressure. Let's compare notes. It's so much fun.
To quote Dave and Adam, find the others. We got to find the others. So right now, more than ever, it's so important for us to find those that are really thinking differently about the problem and innovating quickly and just pushing the boundaries of what's possible. So we know they're out there. And if you're out there and you're listening, reach out to us. We would love to chat.
Yes, please.
Amazing. Thanks so much,
Thank
Talya.
you. Thank you.